Climate Week, the Africa Climate Week will also be held later in August of this year in Gabon. These are just but a few of the conferences that are actually taking place on our continent. Africa will also be hosting the 27th Conference of Parties, COP27, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And in this regard, we welcome and express our fullest support to the incoming Egyptian COP27 presidency. The world is expecting us to build and maintain the momentum from Glasgow and to deliver concrete results in Sharm el-Sheikh. And we must therefore, to achieve this, work together to deliver ambitious decisions. So let me at this point thank our technical experts at the national level, at the African Group of Negotiators who have been working diligently to ensure that we are prepared for COP27 and that our priorities are well articulated in those negotiations. Zambia is our current chair of the African Group of Negotiators, and they will also be making a presentation on the status of climate change negotiations, our common position, and our key messages for COP27. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa has and continues to experience climate-induced crises for decades, and it is also warming faster than the rest of the world. In fact, the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 6th assessment, confirms that we are operating in what we might as well call a state of emergency. The ongoing drought in the Horn of Africa, cyclones in Mozambique and neighboring Southern African countries, the recent devastating floods that I referred to in South Africa, as well as a locust invasion in 2020, underscore the reality of this emergency. Despite this, countries most responsible for the climate crisis are not operating in an emergency mode. We all know that without adaptation, climate change will lead to an equivalent of 2 to 4% annual loss in GDP in our continent by the year 2040, with the poor, women, and the most vulnerable bearing the brunt of this impact. In this regard, we must continue pressurizing for the recognition of special needs, circumstances of Africa, as is actually recognized in the convention. Most importantly, we must hold the big emitters to account by resubmitting more ambitious, nationally determined contributions by the deadline of the 23rd of September this year, and a synthesis report from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, indicating how these submissions will close the emission gap and minimize the future cost for adaptation, loss, and damage. Keeping a 1.5 degree centigrade alive will keep Africa alive. We must therefore give the world a strong signal that keeping to 1.5 degrees Celsius is not negotiable for us on the African continent. As agreed in Glasgow, ambition in all fronts remain critical to solving the climate crisis. In Sharm el-Sheikh, we must build on and strengthen the commitments of the Glasgow Pact. But ambition must also reflect equity, justice, and the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacity, and must, at the end of the day, leave no one behind. We cannot achieve progress without means of implementation. Adaptation only receives 25% of global finance, and of this, Africa only receives 3%. The financing gap in many countries on our continent surpasses government budgets and available donor funding. The fact that we are still struggling to reach $1 billion after 13 years, to say the least, is nothing but scandalous. We have to change this narrative. Adaptation financing must be tripled. A dedicated fund for loss and damage should be put in place to support the recovery from climate emergencies. Building back better cannot be achieved without adequate, predictable climate finance. Funding for loss and damage must be made an emergency agenda when we get to Sharm el-Sheikh. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at carbon credits, they have gained significant traction in the past, and more so after the finalization of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Indeed, as you're all aware, our continent did not benefit from the carbon markets under the Kyoto Protocol. Reason, because of limited foreign direct investment opportunities and technical capacity to participate in the clean development mechanism, fair terms. The world cannot transition to net zero without low carbon investments in Africa. Africa has untapped potential and market for renewable energy. The forests of the Congo and the African landscape sequester more carbon than the Amazon and regulate the global climate. And it is for this reason that we must set a just and fair price for our carbon offsets. We must also expeditiously put in place policy and institutional framework to improve our readiness for the implementation of Article 6. Further, I urge all of you to put additional efforts outside the negotiation process to develop domestic laws and plans to implement the global and regional policies. This will include the first African Union Climate Change Resilience Strategy and Action Plan 2022-2032 that is to be launched during this session and which will be our primary document for reference at COP27. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude my remarks, I want to emphasize also the importance of us working with our youth, working with indigenous communities, and also working with civil society organizations as we prepare for COP27. We must give our youth the space to drive the change that we want. So, ladies and gentlemen, wish us all fruitful deliberations, and I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.